Thank you so much for all you do. It simply wouldn't work without you, and thank you for going on to inspire so many young people. To all the supporters here today, thank you.
Somewhere inside Buckingham Palace, a formal note is being drafted. Not a press release, not a public announcement. A quiet, controlled piece of paper the people writing it hoped would never need to exist. When it arrived at Bagshot Park, it confirmed something the British monarchy had spent years trying to avoid putting in writing. Prince Edward had won. Not just won a dispute or held his ground in a family disagreement. He had forced the crown, an institution that rarely admits it was wrong, to back down completely, in writing, on the record. But here's the question that matters. How does a man dismissed for decades as the quiet one, the least noticeable Windsor, build a case so solid that even King Charles III's lawyers couldn't break it? Because that's exactly what happened, and the answer takes us back to a dying prince, a queen who knew her time was running out, and documents signed during one of the family's darkest moments. Stay with this, because what unfolded didn't just shake the royal family, it changed the conversation about what a king can actually do. The promise that started everything. To understand why March 25th mattered so much, you have to look at Queen Elizabeth II in her final years. Not the ceremonial figure on the Buckingham Palace balcony, but the private Elizabeth, the mother who had watched her family fracture again and again and wanted the damage to stop with her. By 2021, she had already lost too much. Andrew had become a constant source of controversy. Harry had stepped away. The tabloids were filled with fresh Windsor headlines almost every day. Through it all, one son quietly kept working. He showed up, did his duty, stayed out of unnecessary drama, and rarely gave the press anything to exploit. Edward. So, when Elizabeth began making decisions that would outlast her, Edward received special attention. The Duke of Edinburgh title had been Prince Philip's identity for more than 70 years. It wasn't simply an honor. It represented his life's work and legacy. Elizabeth believed that without proper protection, the title could eventually be reassigned or quietly diminished. So she didn't just make a verbal promise, she documented it. That promise became official in April 2023, when King Charles III granted the Dukedom of Edinburgh to his youngest brother. Publicly, it looked like a smooth transition honoring family tradition. But away from the cameras was another part of the inheritance, one that involved paperwork instead of ceremony. Tied to that title was a property, and that property was about to become one of the monarchy's most closely watched assets. The house that Edward built. Ask yourself this. If someone handed you the keys to a crumbling 120-room mansion with rent of £5,000 a year, but told you that you alone had to fund major repairs before it was fit to live in, would you accept? Most people wouldn't. But in March 1998, Prince Edward did. Bagshot Park isn't just another royal house. It sits on 51 acres inside Windsor Great Park. It is a Tudor Gothic mansion and the traditional seat of the Dukedom of Edinburgh. But in 1998, it was in terrible condition. The building had been neglected for years while the Crown Estate explored other uses, including the possibility of turning it into a hotel or conference center. Edward accepted the challenge and invested £1.36 million of his own money before becoming a full-time working royal. Restoration costs eventually reached nearly £3 million. The Crown Estate contributed as well, but Edward personally carried a significant financial burden. When the work was finished, his rent increased to £90,000 a year. The National Audit Office confirmed that amount reflected market value. Edward paid it every year without complaint or special treatment. Think about that for a moment. While Edward was paying market rates and helping restore the property, his brother Andrew remained at Royal Lodge under very different arrangements. The National Audit Office documented the contrast clearly. One prince followed the rules. The other operated under different terms. And eventually, the institution that had allowed that difference began looking closely at Edward's position instead. Edward had gone even further than many people realized. In 2007, through his company, Eclipse Nominees Limited, he paid £5 million to extend his lease to 150 years. This wasn't a temporary arrangement. It was a long-term commitment that gave him the right to sell the lease and retain the profit. He secured a level of control that would be difficult to undo. By 2026, the property was estimated to be worth around £30 million. Suddenly, the monarchy's modernization plans carried a significant financial dimension. The pressure builds. This is where the story becomes especially important. Charles came to the throne in September 2022 with a vision of a slimmer monarchy, fewer working royals, tighter finances, and greater central control. On paper, those goals sounded reasonable, but the way they were carried out became another matter. By 2026, royal leases were being reviewed. Financial audits were taking place behind closed doors. Pressure was quietly being applied to how family members managed the properties connected to the crown. Bagshot Park became part of that conversation. But those applying the pressure encountered something they hadn't expected. They encountered a man who had been preparing for this moment since 1998. According to this account, Queen Elizabeth II had prepared a letter of intent linking Bagshot Park directly to the Edinburgh title for Edward's lifetime, with Prince Philip witnessing the document during his final weeks. Think about that for a moment. A man nearing the end of his life took time to help protect his youngest son's position. Philip had spent more than 70 years inside the machinery of the monarchy. He understood how quiet institutional pressure could work. He knew that making someone's future uncertain could be just as powerful as any direct order. He didn't want that to happen to Edward, so Edward kept everything: the original lease, every financial record, every repair invoice, every payment, every audit. 20 years of documentation had created a file that almost nobody inside the palace expected to exist. The tiara. But the dispute didn't begin with the property. It began with something smaller, more personal, and in many ways more revealing about what was driving the pressure. Earlier in 2026, before Edward's lawyers presented their case, a palace official visited the Edinburgh household. The visit was described as routine, a jewelry audit, a national heritage review, standard procedure. In reality, someone arrived with a clipboard to question jewelry Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, had worn as her own for 25 years. At the center of that review was the Anthem tiara. This wasn't just another piece from a shared royal collection. It had been created for Sophie's wedding in 1999, commissioned by Queen Elizabeth II, using antique elements from Queen Victoria's private collection. It was Elizabeth's personal gift to the woman her youngest son was marrying. For nearly 2 decades, it remained Sophie's signature tiara. That detail mattered because Sophie was never known for regularly wearing the grand state tiaras used by other senior royals. Within the family, the Anthem tiara was understood to be hers. Now, that ownership was being questioned. The argument was framed as a legal issue. Because the tiara contained historic elements dating back to Queen Victoria, it could potentially be classified as crown property. That would mean moving it into the royal vault, with Sophie needing permission each time she wanted to wear her own wedding tiara, a gift from the woman she considered like a mother. But here's the problem. If a personal gift from the monarch could be reclassified because of its historical components, where would it end? Every piece of jewelry Elizabeth gave during her reign could become open to review. Even Queen Camilla's own collection, much of it connected to royal history, could face similar questions. Edward's legal team recognized the contradiction immediately. They produced a deed of gift signed by Elizabeth in 1999, stating clearly that the Anthem tiara was a private wedding present, not a state loan, not property held in trust. It belonged to Sophie. But Edward had strengthened the case even further. In 1999, he had commissioned a matching pearl necklace and earrings designed specifically to complement the Anthem tiara. While Crown funds covered the materials, Edward personally retained the design rights. His lawyers argued the tiara and pearl set formed a single artistic creation linked to his own design work. Removing the tiara would break that artistic unit, adding another legal argument few had anticipated. There was something else in the file as well, something that had nothing to do with legal documents. In October 2019, during a reception at Buckingham Palace celebrating the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Trust, Sophie was giving a speech. In the middle of it, she looked toward Queen Elizabeth II and, without planning to, called her Mama. It simply slipped out. In a family where every public word is carefully measured, that single moment revealed how close the two women truly were. The woman who signed the deed of gift was the woman Sophie regarded as her mother. Now another interpretation of the rules threatened that gift. By the afternoon of March 25th, Edward's lawyers issued a direct warning. If the claim against the tiara wasn't withdrawn by the end of the day, they would release private letters written by Queen Elizabeth expressing her wish that Sophie retain full ownership of her jewelry. According to those familiar with the situation, those letters also contained personal comments about Camilla. The implications were significant. Charles had spent years rebuilding Camilla's public image after decades of criticism. Private letters revealing Elizabeth's personal feelings could have reopened difficult chapters many believed had been left behind. Anne walks in. Up to this point, the dispute had been about documents, legal arguments, and paperwork. Then Princess Anne entered a private meeting inside Buckingham Palace. Anne and Sophie had not always shared a close relationship. As recently as 2021, that distance was noticeable. Anne has never been known for displaying emotion publicly. But Prince Philip's death changed family dynamics. During Queen Elizabeth's final year, Anne and Sophie spent far more time together while supporting her. By Elizabeth's funeral in September 2022, that quiet bond had become visible. As they waited beside the coffin, Sophie gently placed a hand on Anne's back. It was a small moment, but in a family known for restraint, it carried meaning. By March 2026, that relationship had become something stronger. When Anne met privately with King Charles III, she wasn't acting as a mediator. She had carefully reviewed Edward's documents and believed the issues deserved serious attention. She spoke directly. If private gifts from their mother could be questioned or reclaimed, she argued, then the word of a monarch would lose its meaning. Then she delivered the line that changed the tone of the meeting. If our mother's signature on a lease or a deed of gift is not worth the paper it's written on today, then your signature will be worth even less tomorrow. That wasn't a diplomatic observation. It challenged the principle on which royal authority depends. A monarch's authority relies on confidence that official promises and signed documents will be respected across generations. Undermine that tradition, Anne argued, and future promises become harder to trust. She had also personally reviewed the Bagshot Park documents. She knew what Edward had invested. She knew the terms accepted by the Crown estate. She understood exactly what a 150-year lease meant. Her conclusion was straightforward. Edward had paid for the agreement. The Crown estate had accepted it. The arrangement should stand. Anne refused to separate the disputes over the tiara and Bagshot Park. In her view, both involved personal gifts from Queen Elizabeth supported by signed legal documents. Challenge one using the same reasoning, and the other naturally comes into question. She then warned Charles that if the pressure continued, particularly if Camilla's office remained involved, she would support a full review of the Queen's household, including expenses, staffing, and financial allocations connected to Queen Camilla. It was a warning many would take seriously. Anne has long been associated with financial discipline and public service. Her reputation gave weight to her words. She also raised concerns about Edward's children. Quiet discussions had reportedly been building around moving James, Earl of Wessex, and Lady Louise Windsor into private life sooner than their family had planned, reducing the protections connected with their royal roles. Anne shut it down immediately. She had chosen a private life for her own children, Peter and Zara, years ago, but that was her choice, made freely, without institutional pressure. What she was seeing now was different. Pressure was being placed on children who had not made that choice, and she was not prepared to stand by. By the time she walked out of that room, Charles had no easy options left. Support Camilla and risk damaging the credibility of his own authority, or step back and accept that some of his mother's decisions were beyond his reach. The legal verdict. After Anne's meeting and a full review of the dossier, King Charles III's legal team reportedly reached one conclusion. Prince Edward's position was extremely difficult to challenge. Every document held up. The original lease, the financial records, the letter of intent witnessed by Prince Philip, the deed of gift for the tiara, and 2 decades of maintenance records showing the Crown had benefited from Edward's stewardship of the estate. Then came the detail that reportedly affected Charles most. He had always known his mother protected Edward and Sophie, but he had not realized Philip had formally supported those protections in writing during the final stage of his life. That changed everything. It was no longer just Queen Elizabeth protecting her youngest son. It was both parents together, making sure what they had built for Edward and Sophie would outlast them. Since granting the dukedom in April 2023, Charles reportedly believed he still retained some authority over what came with the title. His own legal advisors concluded otherwise. What his mother had given Edward was not temporary, conditional, or subject to later review. It had been formally documented and witnessed by 2 of the monarchy's most senior figures. The handwritten note and the response. When the legal route failed, Charles reportedly turned to a personal one. He wrote a handwritten note and sent it directly to Bagshot Park, requesting a private family meeting. Think about what that meant. A reigning monarch, capable of directing institutions and commanding national attention, personally writing to his younger brother because official channels had reached their limit. The reply made the situation unmistakable. Edward would not meet without his full legal team present. That response changed everything. It signaled that this was no longer simply a family disagreement. It had moved beyond quiet conversations and private compromise. Edward was no longer acting as the younger brother trying to preserve peace. He was acting as someone determined to protect what he believed had been legally secured. Once a line like that is drawn, it rarely disappears. The palace is divided. While the legal dispute unfolded, another development remained hidden from public view. Inside the palace, loyalties reportedly began shifting. Staff members who had worked with Edward and Sophie for years quietly expressed support for the Edinburgh household. Frustration toward the Queen's office reportedly spread through palace corridors, usually known for strict discretion. Where divisions emerge, information often follows. Private conversations, internal notes, and discussions that normally remained inside Buckingham Palace reportedly moved closer to becoming public than ever before. According to reports from those familiar with the situation, one insider summarized the atmosphere this way. The king is being led into a minefield. He is being pushed to choose between his wife's demands and his mother's final decisions. There is no outcome that does not damage the family. That was more than an image problem. Institutions like the monarchy are often affected most by quiet internal divisions rather than dramatic public moments. Those fractures can grow gradually until they become impossible to ignore. There was also the public dimension. At a time when many people across Britain were dealing with rising living costs and financial pressure, the image of a king attempting to reclaim a home, restored and maintained by his own brother for decades, would likely have been difficult for many to accept. The monarchy has always depended on understanding public opinion, and many believed the public had little appetite for such a dispute. The confirmation. Late on March 25, 2026, a formal note was reportedly sent from the office of the Master of the Jewel House to Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh. It was brief and direct. The anthem Tiara would remain under her exclusive private control. At the same time, the review of Bagshot Park was reportedly brought to an end. Official wording described the decision as recognition of the Edinburgh household's role in maintaining the estate. Neutral language allowing everyone to move forward without openly acknowledging defeat. Inside the palace, however, many believed the meaning was clear. The crown had stepped back. Everything Edward held remained exactly where Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip had intended it to be, supported by documentation that had survived every challenge. That formal note will remain in the archives long after everyone involved is gone. Future readers will see that a claim was made, examined, and ultimately withdrawn. What it cost. The outcome may have been clear, but families like this are rarely left unchanged. The relationship between King Charles III and Prince Edward was likely affected in lasting ways. Publicly, they would continue appearing together at official engagements, standing for photographs and presenting the unity expected of the monarchy. Privately, however, everyone involved would remember what had happened. One brother had relied on lawyers to protect what he believed was rightfully his. The institution that shaped both of them had become part of that dispute. Experiences like that do not simply disappear, they become part of every future interaction. Two different centers of influence now appeared to exist within the modern royal structure. At Buckingham Palace, Charles and Camilla continued pursuing their vision of a more centralized monarchy. Elsewhere stood Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and Sophie. According to those following royal affairs, they were also quietly supported by Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales. They were not issuing public statements. They were simply maintaining what they believed had already been established. For James, Earl of Wessex, and Lady Louise Windsor, watching their father handle the dispute became a lesson that could stay with them for life. They watched him rely on preparation rather than publicity. He kept every document. He trusted written agreements, and when challenged, he was ready. One day, James may inherit the Duke of Edinburgh title, the same title Prince Philip carried for more than 70 years. If that day comes, he may also remember one important lesson. Institutions can change, but properly documented agreements can endure. Charles still has the monarchy. He still holds the authority of the crown. But according to this account, what he no longer possesses is the assumption that every decision within the institution can be changed. His mother created protections. His father witnessed them. His youngest brother spent nearly 3 decades making sure they could withstand scrutiny. When those protections were finally tested, they reportedly held. Queen Elizabeth II is gone. But according to this account, on March 25, 2026, her decisions endured. Prince Philip is gone. But the document he reportedly witnessed continued to carry weight. And inside a 120-room Tudor Gothic mansion on 51 acres in Surrey, Prince Edward ended that day with his home, his title, and his wife's tiara exactly where they had long been intended to remain. Whether every reported detail unfolded exactly this way or not, one thing is certain. Stories like this continue to capture attention because they raise bigger questions about history, family, loyalty, and the limits of power inside one of the world's oldest institutions. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the royal family, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Queen Elizabeth's final wishes should always be respected, or should every monarch have the power to reshape the future in their own way? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next royal story. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.